Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kim, and I'm your moderator. The goal of today's webinar is to give insight into how to improve upon the current way centers are being run and how agents are currently being viewed and used. We're going to discuss the state of call centers today and then delve a little bit deeper into what some of the staffing options are and best practices to create the most cost-effective and efficient environment without compromising your customer experience. And then, we're going to close out with the Q&A and go from there. So let's get started. I want to introduce you to my two speakers. First, we have Dennis Weichel, who is the founder and managing director of PPT Solutions. He's got over 20 years experience leading small to large contact center organizations and designs and helps clients implement their solutions that drive their customer experience while delivering bottom line impact. And we have Steve Prager, who's the SVP of Customer Experience over at Smart Action, and he's got over 20 years sales management experience and assists clients in creating the best experience for their customers. So moving on, I'm going to hand over to you, Steve, to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. Dennis, welcome. Thanks for spending the time with us today. I'm excited to share some information and go through something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. And for the folks that are listening in, the three key takeaways that we really want to help you sort of get out of today is a general understanding of insourcing versus outsourcing, what's right for your business, potentially outsourcing the right way and being able to mitigate the risk on that. And this is something that Dennis has done a lot of work in and can definitely help and guide you. And then understanding sort of today's view on the agent experience and a little bit of detail around that and what's been happening out there. And I think there's a real balance between the agent experience as well as, the technologies that are being used today. And I'll start off with a quick story, and then we'll get into more of the content. I was at a pretty large client this morning and working with them on really doing more around the idea of self-service. And it's a real balance when we started talking about 3 different call centers, plus they have one small outsourced piece that they're using. So they do a combination of the insourcing versus the outsourcing piece. And then in addition to that, I said, so for the time that we've been working with you guys over the last couple of years, what's happened in, within your agent pool? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? What's been, taking place in particular? And they said, I can't tell you that it's gone down per se. And of course, we're a technology company, so we're looking to see whether our solution is helping to potentially, alleviate some of those costs. We talk about reducing costs in the contact center. But what they have said is they've grown, which is a good sign, right? So they've been able to scale effectively. But they've also said it's become more complicated. And this is an interesting concept of what's going on within the contact center space today is that, things are, from the agent standpoint, getting more complicated as such. And so I think, this is going to be a topic of good discussion. And for all of those folks that are on the phone here today as well and viewing our screen, beyond the questions that we're going to try to handle, if you would like to get access to Dennis or even myself to ask questions afterwards, we can set that up, and Kim's happy to organize that for us. So if we move on to the next slide, as we talk about, the call center today, certainly there are a lot of components that exist. As I mentioned before, in just talking with the one client, they do a series of in-house across 3 different contact centers. They do some outsourcing. Dennis is going to touch on a little bit of co-sourcing and what that means, not too much though. And then we've got, technology, multi-channel stuff, self-service, social media, lots of considerations as far as what they're thinking about as it relates to their customer service. And the interesting piece around all of this, when you start looking at things like the customer expectations, is customers do want to get it right the first time, and they care about speed. What's been happening more so over the last few years is ease of getting things done. So we've seen that a bit more. And then certainly accuracy as it relates to, them making an inquiry or trying to get a solution resolved. And then the whole idea of self-service, can I do it by myself, and is it easy to do it by myself? And then something that's been talked about a lot within contact centers is this omni-channel experience. And we put a quote in there from Deloitte, which I think is very true, and that is that 62% of organizations do view their customer experience provided through contact centers as a competitive differentiator. So that's the majority of the companies and brands out there are utilizing their contact center from the customer service side as a differentiator. We see this a lot in the contact center today, and what we're also seeing out there, and I think what's fair to share with a number of the folks, and you've probably seen some of this from the Forrester research that you'd have access to, is that 2/3 of the consumers really want to be able to do things on their own in some cases. They prefer to do it without speaking to a company representative. Yet the biggest channel for support is still the phone. So as much as they want to be able to do it on their own, they're still picking up a phone call. And what's evidence of that more importantly is that even though they might be starting on the web, and we do recognize that a lot of them start on the web, whether it's through a mobile device or through their own computer, they're still wanting to see a phone number there. They're still wanting to know that if I need to, I could call a 1-800 number. I could call customer service just so I can quickly get an answer. And so that's in the minds of the consumer, and this is what we're talking with a lot of our clients about, which is being able to provide that level of comfort and support in addition to the other channels. We know that these other channels are becoming prominent from a multi-channel standpoint. But what's most important and what we've seen over the last 5 years in particular, and if you think about the customer effort side of it, what you'll see is that, from some work that was done by Matt Dixon and the Corporate Executive Board, what we're seeing specifically in the contact center space, anything to do with customer service, is that the customer effort score, which is measuring whether it's easy to do business or whether the customer felt like it was a low effort in order to get something done with your brand, is far more predictive of consumer behavior in the future. In other words, are they going to come back and spend more money, and are they going to do it more often, which is important for a brand. And what this piece of research, not ours, it's taken from the book, The Effortless Experience, shows is that it's far more predictive compared to your NPS scoring and your CSAT scoring. Now, it's still important to measure both of those numbers. They're very important metrics for brands at many different levels. But what we're seeing as more important metrics is the customer effort score. So if the customer effort score is important, and customer effort is very important to the consumers, then if we start to dig into the contact center space and we look at, insourcing versus outsourcing, and we want to get into, staffing the contact center, then the question comes in, in order to create that effortless experience, in order to be able to reduce the cost with balancing that great customer experience, how is it that we want to look at insourcing versus outsourcing? And I'll introduce Dennis Weigel here and let him take it over and go from there. Dennis.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. And thanks for the welcome earlier and having me on the call. Thanks to both of you for that, and Kim for the kind words on the introduction earlier. Really appreciate it. So good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about this topic. As Kim mentioned, for better or for worse, I've had lots and lots of experiences, some good, some bad, doing a lot of insourcing, outsourcing. And so what I hope to do today is share with you a little bit about what I've learned over time. Obviously, staffing a call center, we could spend the next 3 days full time, full bore in a conference room, really digging deep on this topic. Today, we're going to barely scratch the surface. And as Steve mentioned, very happy to go offline and have much deeper conversations with anybody to the extent it's of interest. But on this first page we're looking at here, you see predominantly two things in front of you, insource and outsource. Co-source, Steve mentioned that earlier. We see that occasionally. It's really more of an edge case, so we purposely decided not to spend time on that today, just given the limited amount of time we have. But if you've not seen that or you're not familiar with it, really it's just a hybrid of insourcing and outsourcing, meaning, insource is, it's your own labor. It's either your employee, outsource is a third party. So it's a hybrid of the two, and there's n number of ways to do it. But today what we're going to focus on is insource and outsource. And there's two, I think, things I'd like to leave you with on this particular page. From my vantage point and from our point of view, insource or outsource, either one can be a good answer for any organization. There are pros and cons to both models. And what I would challenge you to think about is those pros and cons are not the same, meaning depending on the business, the state of your business, the maturity of your processes, et cetera, your pros and cons may be very different than a hyper-growth company that, they're still defining their processes and they're, a little bit of hair on fire, that kind of thing, and they don't have decades and decades of legacy knowledge built in. And so the pros and cons are very different. The real question comes down to, if you're going to get honest with yourself about what are your short, mid, and long-range objectives, and when you look at those pros and cons, and if you do it in a very honest way, the question is, which ones do you think you can most effectively manage and be successful with? Because they're really, in our experience, there's not a perfect solution. And two, what we try to coach and work with clients on is really getting clear on what is germane to your business. What is your core competency? What are you in business to do? And if it's not running call centers, perhaps you should consider outsourcing at least elements. There's certainly a case to be made that even if you don't run call centers and you're let's just say I'll use a cell phone company as an example. It's an easy one. Even though a lot of those guys have internal call centers, I don't think any of them would tell you that call centers is their core business. They would tell you selling phones and turning up customers and putting up cell towers and all that good kind of stuff is their core business. But there might be cases where you want to keep some of that in-house. As an example, just a story from my past life, I was in the wireless industry at once, played an executive role. And, we went through iterations depending on where the business was at any given time. And at one point, we had on the block, a consideration to outsource our retention queue. And while in the wireless industry, a customer doesn't have to call you to leave you, they can just port their number. What we found, oddly enough, is that, a lot of them still do for one reason or another. Even in the prepaid space where there's no contracts keeping them, they would call. And so we made the decision at that point in time to keep that in our own four walls, because it was our last line of defense before the customer left us. And if they were going to give us an opportunity to talk to us, we wanted an opportunity to save them. And while a supplier, frankly, could have done it, could have done a good job, it was a little bit of a philosophical decision. Just as an example, the other thing I want to just draw out on this page, in both categories, what we've listed here, and I'm not going to read each one of them, I'm going to draw out one on each side. We've listed the benefits, but I want to really emphasize that they are the perceived benefits. In some cases, they're real in some organizations. In other cases, they're perceived. Let's take InSource for just an example. Improved customer experience. Oftentimes, we hear from some of our clients, if I insource or if I keep things in-house, I'm going to get a better customer experience. That might be true, but the pure nature and decision of keeping it in-house does not, in effect, give you a better customer experience. Most of the ingredients that require or that you need to have a good experience from an in-source perspective, they're the exact same ingredients that you need in an outsourced solution. You need to get the right talent. You need to have a good compensation plan. You need to have your incentives aligned with what you're trying to deliver to your customer, et cetera, et cetera. You have to have good management, low turnover, all these things. The one difference, the one core difference, as you can guess, is if you're going to outsource, you need to find the right partner, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. On the outsource side, however, most of the time when we're talking to clients about this, something's not going right or something's, frankly, off the rails. But we hear clients say things like, well, I outsourced this a year ago, and frankly, I hired the experts. They should be doing better than they are, and I shouldn't have to manage them day in, day out. Our opinion on it is, and what we've seen most successful is, yeah, okay, you're outsourcing it, and by many accounts, these guys are experts, but that doesn't mean they can solve all your challenges. Outsourcing, in our opinion, is much like a marriage. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes, frankly, getting intimate with each other and being very aligned on what you're trying to accomplish and working hand in hand to accomplish those things. And if you do that, you tend to have more success than you otherwise would. Again, lots we can explore here, but for sake of time, we'll move on. The one thing that I want to call out, we've chosen a particular path today, and that's we're going to explore outsourcing a little bit more than we're going to explore insourcing. That was actually a very deliberate decision. As much as you hear some of the chatter about folks bringing stuff back in-house or even offshore to nearshore or to nearshore to onshore, outsourcing continues to grow in trend. There's more and more companies continue to look at it. So that's why we've chosen that. So moving on to the next slide, I think there's really, I could read everything on the page, and I don't think that's going to be valuable. There's three things I want to draw out here. First, if and when you make a decision to outsource, you want to make sure that what you're outsourcing is either A, very refined, sophisticated, the kinks are worked out, et cetera, or that at least you have the right expectations. Meaning, if you have something that's, not real efficient and it's a little bit broken and you outsource that, and we've seen this happen, people think, well, I outsourced it should just automatically get better. Because, again, these guys are the experts. That's not the case. In fact, in many cases, what we find is it actually gets worse. And someone might say to me, well, why does it get worse? Well, most of the time when that's happening, you've got so much legacy knowledge that isn't documented in a process somewhere. No one's mapped it out. No one really knows what's happening. And now all of a sudden you've outsourced it and you lose all that legacy knowledge and the real warts show up. And that's fine if you've got something that's in that state to outsource it. The real key is be realistic with yourself, set the right expectations internally, and have a very clear path and be transparent with the supplier. This is what we're giving you. This is where we need your help, and have that plan built out from the very beginning. Secondly, I want to draw out two key things on the slide as the second point, identifying the cultural impact and educating yourself. In particular, if you're going to go offshore or nearshore. So first and foremost, our recommendation is go spend time in location, and not just a day or two. Like spend a week, spend 2 weeks, get to know the people, get to know the cultures. Don't just show up for a 4-hour visit to a call center and think you know the country. Really spend time there and invest your time and effort. Because what you'll find, and I'm just going to share a story from my past, I've been responsible for service, tech support, IT development, collections, sales, a number of different facets. And what I found is not all countries are created equal. As an example, let's take Jamaica. And I'm not picking out any countries for good or bad. I'm just using this for illustration purposes. In Jamaica, I've had far more success with sales and collections than I ever had with service or tech support, as an example. That country is typically, what I've found, is more assertive and just better suited for those types of calls. Let's take India, another great country to do work in, but where I've had most success, and I would encourage you to, in addition to hearing from us and hearing from Steve and his team, talk to your own network and kind of hear where they've seen success and failures and challenges. But what I've had most success in India with is non-voice work. So IT development, back office work. They're very good at that stuff. And frankly, they're not bad at the voice work. But for my customers, the ones I've had the pleasure of serving over time, the accent was challenging. At scale, like you could find smaller pockets that worked really well, but when you're talking, 500,000 and in particular a few thousand people, it just gets a lot harder to keep that kind of language neutralization in play. And I would encourage you to think about it this way. When you think of Hollywood and some of the top paid actors, some of them are from Australia, the UK, etc. And when you see them on screen, you wouldn't be the wiser if you didn't know where they were from, that they had a very deep Australian accent. But they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in language coaching to get rid of it. And, I know a lot of people talk about we put agents through accent neutralization, etc. You're fooling yourself if you believe 1 week will change an agent's accent. It just won't. And so just be very realistic, again, about what you're trying to accomplish and what countries are best suited for what kind of work. And then lastly, the final illustration I'll give you on this particular point is the Philippines. I've had lots of great success with customer service over there, some tech support. I've had more success with tech support in Central America, but some in the Philippines. We've won 5 J.D. Power Awards with large-scale operations over there. So it can be done. It can be done well. You just got to take that into account. And then the last thing I want to draw out, actually 2 last things on this slide, from an implementation perspective, don't underestimate it. I think that goes without saying, but if you're considering outsourcing for the first time, make sure you either bring into the organization on your payroll someone or a team of people that have done this and done it many times, not just once, or find organizations like like our organization or frankly, one of our competitors that will help you do it and help, it may not be perfect. None of these big efforts are ever perfect, but they'll help mitigate a lot of time and save you a lot of money and frankly, customer experience pain. And I want to tie back to what Steve talked about in customer effort and its propensity to the higher correlation it has to share of wallet, repurchase, word of mouth, all the, frankly, metrics that matter that will grow your business. While you're considering all these moves, make sure you keep the customer at the center and the fact that you want to make sure whatever you do, it stays simple on the customer side, as a most important factor. I can't tell you how many times horse trading always happens in business, and I can't tell you how many times, and when I was in corporate America, I would make trade-offs. And we would always go in with, okay, this is what phase 1 is going to look like, but then IT is going to fix that in phase 2. And while it did happen sometimes, it didn't always happen in phase 2. Sometimes it was phase 10, and we had to live with that clunky solution for a while, and it made it difficult, sometimes just for the agent, sometimes, frankly, for both agents and customers. As you start outsourcing, there's any number of things that you could do to mitigate the risks, but we've kind of tried to boil down on the next slide 5 things that we found over and over again. If you check the box on all these, and if you do these well, it may not resolve every single risk you have, but it's going to take 80-90% of them off the table. So first, what I said earlier, get aligned organizationally. Plenty of examples where we talk to clients and the brand marketing care folks they've got these big aspirations around customer experience, and you go talk to the CFO, and he or she tells us, yeah, we're expecting them to cut 50% from their budget. Those things can be synonymous. You can accomplish both, but in most cases, we find pretty significant disconnects there when the alignment is off. 2, get the right talent in place. The best example I can give you is we've seen clients convert great, in particular when they're outsourcing for the first time, great call center directors, great call center managers, and they turn them into vendor managers. And they do that because, hey, they were great at managing a call center, the people love them, et cetera, et cetera. That, while not a recipe for disaster, it requires pause and it requires deliberate thought, because what makes a person, the skills that make them successful managing an internal operation aren't the same skills required to manage an external operation. And that may be intuitive, but we have seen that mistake over and over. And by the way, it doesn't mean they can't, but it just requires deliberate thought. An external operation you can't command and control is very much, and you can try, but if you're there in a relationship, you're already in the wrong place. It really requires finesse and patience and working with them day in, day out. Thirdly, I'm going to tell you a little story on this one, but don't rely just on surveys and your data analytics team to tell you what's going on. At the encouragement of some of my mentors, I started doing at one point in my career, and this was when I was with the Sprint prepaid group managing our 4 prepaid brands. I started as responsible for customer experience then, and I started meeting personally with handfuls of our customers every quarter across each of the brands, so Virgin Mobile, Boost Mobile, Common Sense at the time, and Assurance Wireless. And what was fascinating to me is I started hearing and learning things that I wasn't getting through our data team. Not that they were doing a bad job, they were actually doing a great job. But, the devil's in the details. And just one story, I had a customer say to me in a meeting, he says, because I'd always ask the question, if you could change anything, what would it be? And a lot of times things come up that just fundamentally you can't do for lots of reasons. We can talk about that another day. But this one customer says to me, I just need to know what to expect. I kind of look at him and was like, tell me more. I have no idea what you're talking about. He says, look, when I call in, I don't know if you're going to answer my phone in 2 minutes, 2 seconds, 2 hours. I just don't know. And keep in mind, this was a number of years ago, back before virtual queues and callback, and we didn't have at the time the estimated wait times built in. So literally, you could call in and you have no idea if you're getting ready to get answered, if you're going to wait 5 more minutes. And so I was kind of puzzled. I look at our scorecards on a regular basis. We read them out to the CEO every month, and frankly, we usually look really good. And so I was like, that just doesn't make sense. So I went back, started digging. What I found out is, we were very good at executing in the aggregate. But when you get down to the interval level, we were only hitting 73% of our intervals at the expectation that we were setting with our customers. And so, yeah, the aggregate number looked great. The interval execution, lots of variability. That led us to two things. We implemented higher accountability internally with our own team to get the forecast right at an interval level, not at a daily, weekly, monthly level, but at an interval level. And then with the suppliers, we worked to implement a concept called SIR, Successful Interval Ratio. Ultimately, what we did is we drove the variability out. 95% of our intervals were answered at service level and or ASA target. And so what I would tell you is that was one of four things we did that allowed us to win multiple J.D. Power Awards back to back. Secondly, the last two things here, communicate frequently with your outsourced partners, which is the same thing we were talking about earlier, but most critically, be open to their suggestions. Can't tell you how many times we see that not be the case. And then finally, fail fast. Don't get into analysis paralysis. We are by no means saying be reckless, but try things. Get things out there, see what's working, see what's not. It will allow you to bend the time to proficiency curve in your favor most of the time. So I just spent a lot of time talking about what's going on in the outsourced environment. But the last thing, and certainly not the least thing that I want to touch on, and Steve will probably comment on this as well because I know he has a lot of experience and passion around this topic as well, but is the agent experience. So on the page in front of you, you see principally the ingredients it takes to allow an agent to be successful. What I would challenge you to think about today as you go back to your day jobs and your organizations is, everybody's very familiar with the customer life cycle and how you manage it and, how you map things from the time they join your company to the time they leave and all the inflection points and how you try to capitalize on those. What we are working with clients today on and what we're recommending, and frankly what we're beginning to see as an early trend but a growing trend, is let's take the same discipline and apply it to our call centers. So what is the agent life cycle? How do we capitalize on those inflection points from the moment they come through the door to apply, to that first day in the classroom, to the time they take their first call in nesting, to the time they go to their supervisor, et cetera, et cetera? How do you capitalize on those and not just make them feel like they're part of your fabric, but really, truly embed them in your fabric? And I would go as far as to say, Steve talked about customer effort score. The same applies here. You should really be thinking about agent effort score. The easier you make their job, the better customer experience you're going to have. And just to be really clear, I'm not saying give them simple tasks. In the contrary, I'm actually saying challenge them. Give them very challenging tasks. That's going to make them engage. They're going to engage with your customers more effectively. In the long run, it's going to pay you dividends. And leave technology, as Steve talked about earlier, to help you fill in the rest of the gaps and really capitalize on that. I'll turn it back over to Steve for any closing thoughts there.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. There's a lot of real good learnings in the last two slides that you showed up here. And the interesting piece around the agent experience, and there were some learnings that I took from the mitigating the risk side of it that we have seen, when we start to work with clients is we like to sit down and we like to ride along with the agents and understand what are they going through, because part of understanding the customer's journey through a particular organization is to, and if we're going to make some decisions as to what technologies should we put in place as far as helping to make the customer experience effortless, is we need to understand what the agents are going through today. And in addition to looking at that agent life cycle, as you talked about, Dennis, and understanding really sort of what is the agent effort, is perhaps listening in and understanding what are they going through, which I know a lot of organizations do that today. They get to understand sort of what the customers are doing, what are they saying, how are they reacting to the agent. And in fact, some of our work with a very large BPO out there today is showing us that the customers themselves, when they're calling in to talk with the agent, that relationship has actually changed a lot. That relationship has changed in the sense that the customers are far more demanding and they're far more frustrated by the time they get to the agent. And what is happening is it's changing the way the agent is reacting to them. And in fact, what we're finding in some cases, and this isn't something necessarily that we address wholeheartedly, but we try to implement the technologies that helps to alleviate it, is they're having to restructure the way that they schedule, the way that they plan out their resources, perhaps shorter shifts due to high stress levels, different jobs so that they're not handling the same level of stress on an ongoing basis. So it's interesting how all of this kind of ties together, and it's been evolving a lot over the last 2 to 3 years in particular. So if we go on to understanding sort of what the contact center, the call center of tomorrow looks like, it's a bit of a compare and contrast to what's going on today. And if you look at it and say, look, today really the high priority, so from top to bottom, your high priority is your live agents, and as Dennis was talking about, insourced, outsourced, co-sourced. However you're doing that, if you want to explore that further, Dennis would be certainly happy to chat with you further on that one. But then the next in line becomes more of the technology side of it, looking at the multiple channels and potentially self-service. So, these things have been coming along for the last, 10 years around understanding how do I deal with separate channels beyond, what I'm traditionally used to seeing happen at my call center. But what you also see is the customer expectations. And then when I look at what's happening today, and then we look at what's happening, what will be happening more so for tomorrow, is the call centers that are going to be far more successful, that are going to really help to achieve that higher customer effort score and provide that great effortless experience for their own customers, are actually starting to prioritize technology more. They're putting the concept of self-service on the top of their list and understanding how that applies across multiple channels. And so that can help to do a couple of things. It can actually help to shorten up the time that customers have while they're on either the phone or in any potential interaction on any channel. It helps to shorten it up if you've got the right technologies in there to be able to provide that, self-service and shorten things up. Remember, it's about effort, right? The second thing is then they begin to focus on, if they put the technology first, but then the live agents are still there. But what, those that are really forward-thinking, the call centers that are forward-thinking, are really working on evolving the live agent to not just service the customer, but to actually be a superhero for their customers. So they're training them more as specialists because they're able to, a lot of this sort of self-service pieces, the high volume, low value calls. That was the discussion with my client this morning. We just want to get rid of the high volume, low value calls and those types of interactions. We want to be able to get rid of those conversations and put them out to something that's more automated. Then how can we get into helping our agents to become more valuable? And that's the second piece of it. And then what's interesting around the customer expectations, you'll see a slight shift here. If you can see it there, originally it's right the first time with speed and ease. Now it's right the first time with ease and then speed, right? And then we're seeing accuracy, but we're also adding in self-service. And then the omni-channel experience is certainly very, very important as we start to see all these different channels going on out there. So that is, what we're seeing more so for the call center for tomorrow, and taking it from there. So from Smart Action side of it, taking your contact center to the next level. What we work on primarily is helping organizations to optimize their agents. We're in the business of helping consumers to love the brands that they want to connect with by creating an effortless customer service experience. And we do this through the use of, an artificial intelligence-based solution. And if you were to look at, in this particular case, if you look at all the different conversations that are happening and you had to dice and slice the conversations that are coming into your, call center today, and you have a combination of real simple phone calls, the middle tier phone calls, which are those, high volume, low value add calls, and then the really, really complex calls. A lot of times when we begin working with clients, they might have a little bit of the self-service piece taken care of. They've got press 1 for this, press 2 for that. That's likely taken care of up front. but then there's also a lot of the calls are being taken by live agents. From our side of it, when we begin working with clients and partnering alongside what Dennis is doing, is we start to figure out how technologies, in particular, our platform can help to mitigate a lot of these calls as well as conversations that are going on out there in order to, reduce that effort for the customer, make it easy, and then allow the live agents to really focus on the complex stuff. So.
Okay, thank you guys for that thorough presentation. We did go a little bit over on time, but we do still have most of our viewers with us, so I will relay a couple questions over to you guys and close out this way. First question is, in regards to the agent, this is probably for you, Dennis, in regards to the agent and experience slide and talking about offshoring, how do you control that when you're not really able to control that?
Well, so it's a very great question because you're exactly right. You don't control it. What you do is, I'll go back to a couple things I said and I'll expand on one that I referenced a couple times. So first, depending on what business you're in and what your objectives are, go invest the time in the various locations that you're considering outsourcing to really make sure that the culture of the people is one that will help support and enable you to meet your objectives. So, for example, this is just my opinion based on my experience, if you own sales and you're trying to drive sales, I would tell you 10 ways to Sunday, and if you're doing it at scale, so if you're doing it with several hundred people, I would tell you not to do that in the Philippines. There's a lot of other countries that I believe just their culture and how assertive they are or not just will fit that type of program better. If you are trying to do a customer service program, the Philippines might be a great fit. They're all good in their own right. There are different pros and cons and things they're better at than the others. So that's the first part. The second part, and this is around the control question. So first, let me throw a different word at you that I didn't use earlier, and maybe I should have. The idea of vested sourcing. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't. There's a book titled Vested. If you are considering going into a new relationship, it is worth taking time to read that book. But the idea here is principally this. It's not what's in it for me as the client. It's not what's in it for you as the vendor. It's what's in it for we. And if you build the contract around that type of transparency and you get really clear what you both want to get out of it, that's where you get true game-changing relationships. And no longer do you have to worry about controlling what's happening on the other end because you're both truly vested in the outcomes that you both are trying to achieve. And then typically when the word contract comes up, you're already in a bad place. If you take the time and energy to do it right in the beginning and truly allow the supplier and allow yourselves to be honest with each other with what you want to get out of it and create a more of a true gain share opportunity, you no longer have to worry about the control.
Perfect. Thank you. I have another question, and this can be delivered to both of you, Steve and Dennis. It's kind of more of an opinion-based question. I was asked, is the idea to eventually have an agent-free center and have everything controlled by technology? And is that possible?
You want that one, Steve, or do you want me to do it?
I figured Steve could answer that.
I'll start. I'll tell you, I'll start, and then Dennis, you're closer to it than likely I am. But I'll put it to our vision as an organization. Knowing where the consumer preferences are going is, our vision is to have that all of the potential conversations that can happen between a consumer and a brand will eventually be fully 100% automated. And that might be 2050, but, that's still another 30 plus years away, but we feel that, that's going to happen. And so, that's why we're moving along that path. I think it's safe to say that automation continues to happen. It continues to grow. Self-service is something that consumers want. I don't know if it'll be 100% personally, but that's our vision as an organization, is to continue along that vein. So, Dennis, over to the real world.
So I mean, I share a lot of the same thoughts. I mean, think about it, right? 20 years ago, the notion of self-driving cars was, frankly, with the except few out there that are true visionaries. I mean, that's crazy, and you're seeing those types of things come to fruition. So can we get to a place where there's absolutely zero agents on the other end of that phone? I don't know. What I do know and what I believe is you will continue to see voice interactions trend down. They've trended down over the last 5 to 10 years. They're going to continue to trend down. Technology is going to make it, it's already making it easier, right? And it's frankly making it harder in some cases. Think about Facebook, Twitter, right? Those technologies and how we integrate them with our mobile life are going to change the dynamic of how we interact. So what I am certain you're going to see, and it may not go to zero, but you're going to see a lot less quote unquote voice. There may still be a human on the other end, but now it's more and more through Twitter. It's more and more through Facebook. At the end of the day, you're still going to have some very highly complex issues come up that it takes a conversation. So even if most of the inbound voice stuff goes away, you're still going to have, hey, I get your issue, but I'm not fully understanding. Can we get on the phone and talk about it? Because I'm going to be able to help you faster. It's going to be easier for you, et cetera, et cetera. So does it go to zero? Like Steve, I can't say for sure personally, but I think the trend, you're going to continue to see it move towards technology. And there's technologies that frankly aren't out there today, as we all know, that will come to fruition and make things, faster, easier, and so on and so forth.
Great. Thank you guys for that. I'm going to throw out one more question, and then we're going to close out. What do you see in the industry as good benchmarks for both customer experience and containment rates?
So good containment rates, such a tricky question. Again, I'm not trying to be wishy-washy here, but it truly depends on what your objectives are as an organization. If you are, let's face it, every organization I ever talk to always talks about, well, we want to create a world-class customer experience. Very few, in fact, I can't say one that has ever said to me, we don't really care about the customer experience, we just want to have the cheapest service solution possible. But their behaviors often resonate more of the latter of what I described. So we've literally worked with clients that have containment rates in their IVR of 80 and 90%. We also have worked with clients on the flip side, in the same industry, by the way, that have containment rates of 10. And it all comes down to what you want to invest in a customer relationship. So giving you a fair benchmark, I can't do that right here, right now, because what I would need to do is spend time with you to understand what are your real objectives. And then I can say, look, based on what you shared with me, here's how people like you in your industry, not people at a personal level, but companies like you in your industry, this is what we see them perform at. And we can give you a more realistic benchmark. Give you an example of I'm going to fall short of saying the client name, but, Fortune 50 company, really big brand out there. Every single person on this call would recognize them. We had a lot of really robust debate around IVRs. And their senior leadership was adamant about not wanting an IVR and blah, 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 blah. And what we challenged them with is, look, what don't you like about the IVR? You don't like how when you call an IVR, most of them are designed to do just what you said, Kim, contain you. They're really not typically designed for the experience. At least that's the large part of the market. And so we challenged them to really throw the paradigm on its head and design from an experience perspective. Does that mean you'll hit what you see in the industry as containment rates? No. In fact, you're going to be a lot lower. But your objective isn't to do what everybody else is doing. It's to create an experience that far exceeds the industry. So it's hard to give you a direct answer on that, but hopefully that gives you some insight, and I don't know who asked it, but I'd be more than happy to explore that closer with them offline.
Perfect. Okay, well, we're going to close out there. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you to our speakers, and we'll see you at the next webinar.